Well, I think I've shared with you before a story about my late grandmother. My grandmother lived in a small one-bedroom apartment above a carpet store in Queens, New York. And on most Sunday afternoons, our entire extended family, aunts, uncles, and cousins, we would cram into that little tiny apartment, and my grandmother would cook a big Italian feast for us. And although my grandmother was not a wealthy woman, there was always so much food. So much so that we all went home with leftovers. And my grandmother would say that Italian word, abbondanza, which you know means abundance. And to this day, I'm still so amazed that my grandmother, who was a poor immigrant widow who raised a large family during the Great Depression, I'm so amazed that she was so tuned in to abundance consciousness. And I share that with you today because, of course, that's what today's gospel story is all about, the multiplication of the loaves and the fish. Jesus took 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and was able to increase it, multiply it, so that everyone there was fed and there was even leftovers. With this miracle, Jesus is teaching us something very important, and that is the spiritual law of abundance. Now, spiritual laws, they're just as real as all the other laws that govern the workings of the universe. So take, for example, the law of gravity. I mean, no one here questions the law of gravity. You know that it's real. So are spiritual laws and principles. Now, oftentimes when I talk about these spiritual laws, online, I have people comment that I am just spewing New Age mumbo-jumbo. And I always say, I am not teaching you New Age, I am teaching you Old Age. These laws and principles have been handed down to us for thousands of years by people like Jesus and the Christian mystics and saints and sages of all wisdom traditions. Now, this miracle of the loaves and the fish, it is the only miracle that appears in all 4 Gospels. The only one. So obviously, the early Christians felt this was a key teaching, a key demonstration of Jesus for us to emulate. But you know, whenever I talk about miracles here, I always have people afterwards who say, you know, Pastor Sal, did that really happen? I mean, could you really take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people? And my pat answer is always, I don't know, I wasn't there. Okay? But what I do know is that the world's greatest theologians, people who have devoted their lives to studying the Bible, people who know more about the Bible than I ever will, have said that the Bible is not a history book. It's not a collection of literal stories. That the people who wrote the Bible weren't writing literal stories, but spiritual ones, symbolic ones. I've shared with you before my favorite quote from the progressive theologian John Dominic Crossan, who's one of the world's leading biblical scholars today. He was part of the famous Jesus Seminar, which is where 150 Bible scholars and theologians from around the world got together to discuss the accuracy of the Bible. And John Dominic Crossan said this: "My point isn't that the ancient people told stories literally, and now we're smart enough to understand them symbolically. My point is that the ancient people told stories symbolically, and now we're dumb enough to understand them literally." I love that quote. Okay. Now, even Pope Francis got in trouble a couple of years ago when he was giving a sermon on the multiplication of the loaves and the fish. And in his sermon, he said the parable of the loaves and the fish. And some conservative Catholics went after him. And they said, it's not a parable. It's not a story. It really happened. Now look, I don't know if those 5,000 people in the field that day were physically fed or they were symbolically or spiritually fed. But I don't think we should get too hung up on that. Because whether or not the stories, the miracles in the Bible are literally true, the point is that they speak to great spiritual truths. And the truth of this miracle is that you have the power within you, through the power and the presence of the Christ, to increase the good that you have been given and to live your life more abundantly. Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, I have come so that you may have life and have it more abundantly. He said that's why he came. Jesus said it is God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So, my friends, if you're not living life abundantly, you're not living the life that God had planned for you. Now, when I speak about abundance and prosperity, I want to be clear. I am not talking about material wealth per se. Now, we of course know there are many pastors in the U.S. today who are preaching what's known as the prosperity gospel. These are pastors of huge mega churches. And what they teach is that faith in Christ will lead you to great material wealth. And certainly those pastors in their churches are experiencing great material wealth. I mean, their churches are multi-million-dollar, state-of-the-art facilities with the latest technology. They have more people on paid staff than we have in our congregation. Okay? Now, whether or not we see eye to eye with their beliefs and how they go about things, I will say that I do agree with them on one thing. Jesus was indeed teaching prosperity principles. All of his miracles are about that, every single one. You remember his very first miracle, the wedding feast at Cana. People saw lack. We don't have enough wine. What are we going to do? Jesus didn't see lack. He saw abundance, and he turned water into wine. In this miracle, the loaves and the fish, again, people panic. They see lack. We don't have enough to feed all the people. Jesus didn't see lack. Even his healing miracles, people saw a lack of health, limitation. Jesus didn't see that. He saw wholeness, abundant health. We have the power within us to tune in to that same abundance consciousness that Jesus had. Now, in our weekly newsletter this week, the epistle, I shared with you a quote from the late Dr. Wayne Dyer, who was one of my favorite spiritual teachers. And his quote is, abundance is not something we acquire. Abundance is something we tune into. It's not what we acquire, it's what we tune into. So how did Jesus tune into that abundance consciousness? Well, we just have to look at today's story. Look what he did. He took 5 loaves and 2 fish, adds up to the number 7. If you remember last year, I gave you a talk about the number 7 in the Bible. It appears so many times. It's not a literal number. It's a symbolic number, a spiritual number, and it represents completion. Spiritual completion. Like God created the world in 7 days, right? Spiritual completion. He saw enough. And what did he do with that? It said he blessed it. He blessed what he had been given. Now, if you look up the word blessed in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it says to confer prosperity upon. To confer prosperity upon. He took what he had and he gave thanks for it. Just like he did at the Last Supper. Every Sunday we commemorate that here. He took the bread and the wine, and what was the first thing he did? He gave thanks for it. Gratitude opens us up to more abundance. What we appreciate, appreciates. So, this principle is rooted in gratitude. Gratitude is the key that unlocks abundance. Another quote is from the contemporary spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle, and he says, "Acknowledging the good that we already have in our lives is the foundation for all abundance." Acknowledging the good that we already have, that's the foundation. But you know, a lot of people aren't living there. They're living in another place. I told you about this place before. It's a city. And the name of the city is Scare. Scare City. Scarcity. Okay. They don't live from a place of abundance and prosperity. They're not dwelling there. They're living in scarcity, in lack, and limitation. It doesn't really have to do with money. Because you know, I know a lot of people who have so much money in the bank, but they're not living prosperous lives because they live in lack and limitation and fear. They're worried about their stock portfolio. They're worried about their retirement account. That's not a prosperous life. The good news of the gospel message is you don't have to live in scarcity. Jesus told us about another place you can dwell, and it's called the kingdom of heaven. And do you remember where he said it was? Within you. When we dwell there, in that state of consciousness, we can see miracles in our lives and live life more abundantly. So what I want to invite you to do, my friends, this week is I want you to enter into the kingdom of heaven within you. Consciously do that throughout your day this week. And in that place, acknowledge that God is the source of your supply. Give thanks for what you have been given. And then believe that more and more of your good is on its way, on time, and in full. That is the good news of the gospel message, that it is God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Namaste.